Hey gang, what's going on? Hope everybody out there is having a good day. Welcome to a special extended version of Intuitive Angling, where we're going to get on here and have like an hour-long seminar for you guys on just so many different parts of bass fishing. And I've had some requests to do a really long video here, since most of my videos are like 5 to 10 minutes long. So what I'm going to do in this particular video here is sort of experimental. I'm going to go through, guys, and just tell you everything I've learned, or a lot of what I've learned, things that have helped me to get to the level where you can become like the best bass angler you can be. And so we're going to cover a wide range of topics here, from some of the basic stuff to some of the more complicated aspects of fishing. And I think there's going to be something for everybody in this, but I don't really know exactly what I'm going to talk about, but I'm just going to spill a bunch of juice here I think you guys might find interesting. And like I said, all this stuff is what I've learned from my own personal experience. And in return for that, let me give you a few options before we get started here. I'll give you guys a few things you can do if you'd like to support the channel and sort of help out, in this hour-long seminar here. If you guys are interested in supporting the channel, some of the best ways you can do it is go to fishthemoment.com, check out our lake map breakdowns and our virtual fishing lessons. I'll include the link in the description for that. Two great ways. You guys know I'm working with Bait Works and Boat Works here in Springfield, Missouri. If you guys are out looking for, a new or used boat and motor, or just any type of fishing tackle you could possibly want, block at Old School Jigs, I'll include the Bait Works link in the description. Also, you guys know that I'm working with Solar Bat sunglasses. If you guys are interested in ordering a pair of my Solar Bat Signature Series, I'll include the link in the description for Solar Bat. And finally, please hit that View Products tab that you see at the video when it comes on at the bottom. If you click on any of those products I recommend, the channel gets 20 cents every time you click on one of them. So that's just some things you can do to sort of support the channel if you like the content here. Okay guys, let's get into this a little bit here. It's going to be wide ranging, and if it goes across good, I think I'm going to do some like hour-long seminars on technique specific stuff like flipping and jerkbait fishing, but we'll get into this. Here's the thing about bass fishing. Like I said, guys, I've been bass fishing since the 1960s with my dad, to some extent. And I've been fishing professionally for since 1985, 35 years, I guess, and, even more. And I've been able to stay in the sport for over 30 years, supporting myself through the fishing industry. And a lot of it has become because of the tournaments. And in that process, guys, I have fished all over the United States. The only places I haven't fished in the United States are the Pacific Northwest. We just have never had any tournaments there. I fished all over the country, Japan, Canada, everywhere. So I've got a diversity of experience to draw on here. So what I want to try to do is I want to go through some of the processes that you can go through to become a better bass angler, become a really good bass angler. And sorry for the chickens here. They're going to probably be bugging me here, along with some of the noise out in the yard there in the street. So anyway, to get to the level, I'm going to start out sort of with some foundational stuff, then I'm going to build up as we go here. First of all, to get to the level of being the best bass angler you can do, hey, get to the level to be the best bass angler you have to do, the first thing that you have to work on, obviously there's got to be a lot of things you work on together, but the first thing that you're going to have to do as your main foundational approach, guys, is you've got to become a proficient caster. This is the most important thing starting out. Not only starting out, but it's the most important thing to allow you to become, to separate yourself from being just an average to below average angler to being an excellent angler. Your casting skills are, I can't stress how critical they are. And that's one of the reasons I became a good caster, and I won the Bass Pro Shop National Casting Competition that Bass Pro had back in the 90s, is that was something I could do that didn't cost me any money, because I didn't have any money, but I could work on my casting. So I spent a ton of time to do it. And a lot of the weaknesses I had as an angler were offset because I was a really good caster. So the first thing that you have to do, guys, is you have to get adept at casting proficiently with a spinning outfit and a bait casting outfit. You have to get proficient at all the different casting techniques and angles. You have to be a good pitcher. You have to be a good flipper. You have to be a roll caster. You have to be able to cast sidearm. You have to cast overhand. You have to be able to skip. There's a wide range of techniques that you have to master and learn to do that. And you have to learn also to become ambidextrous. You learn to cast left-handed and right-handed. And this is something that every single person out there can do. There's not a single person that cannot become the best caster that they can simply by practicing in time. I can't stress this enough as far as it's starting out on the ground level that you get really good at that. The next thing that you have to do once you get confident with your casting skills and take it to the next level is you have to do the same thing with your ability to run your boat and trolling motor. Now this is, like I said, I'm laying some foundational approaches before we get into some more details. But in correlation with casting, you have to become a master at operating a trolling motor. Now, like I said, some of this stuff we're going to get to is assuming you have a boat. If you don't have a boat, we're also going to talk about some other stuff too. But in correlation with becoming that good caster, you have to become an expert at trolling motor manipulation. And when I talk about trolling motor manipulation, I'm talking about the ability to approach cover at the right speed and the right angle. And the problem that you have with guys that are not real good at trolling motor operation, or maybe they're just average or marginal, is they tend to come in on the cover too fast or too slow. One of the most overlooked aspects of being a good angler is your ability to come into that cover at the right speed and at the right angle. And the angle and the speed, it's determined by a lot of different variables. It can be determined by the wind direction, the wind speed, the current, the sunlight angle. There's a lot of different elements to that. But practice approaching cover. Say for example, if you're wanting to practice and you're coming up to a boat dock, practice coming into that boat dock where you're positioned to make your cast at the right angle. And once you do that, and once you get the right distance away from that, and you get the boat at the right angle, and you have that ability to be a really high level caster, that is when you're going to maximize your efficiency tremendously when you're fishing shallow water targets. And the thing about this, guys, is when you're talking about what separates somebody that is just an average dude that goes out and catches some bass once in a while versus somebody that is like an expert at it, it's those little things like that. It's the little things like being able to cast a little bit better than somebody else. It's being able to have your boat positioned at the right speed and right angle. You can't discount how important that is. Now I'll give you guys a prime example here. If anyone out there that has had a boat has done this before, you've been fishing down a bank and there's a good looking piece of cover coming up, and for whatever reason you may have come in too fast on it, or you come in and your boat drifted on top of it and you ruined your chance to catch a fish there. It's the little things about like never allowing that to happen that will allow you to go to that next level as an angler. So spend a tremendous amount of time, with your boat positioning with that. Another thing we'll talk about boats a little bit too is your ability to tie all this type of stuff in with learning how to read your electronics. Now, you guys out there, you know that I'm not big into high-tech electronics, so I'm going to talk in terms of like 2D sonar and GPS and all that type of stuff, working together with it. The other stuff, that can be for another conversation. But one of the big keys about using your sonar effectively is pay attention to your sonar, your 2D sonar, to try to gather as much information as you can in whatever water depth you're fishing. If you're fishing shallow water, for example, say if you're shallow water target fishing, where you're just going down the bank fishing docks and laydowns, pay close attention to the changes in the bank angle and the water depth surrounding those particular objects, because you may get into a pattern where you're fishing boat docks and the key depth on the boat dock is the outside of the dock needs to be in 5 foot of water, not in 7 foot of water, not in 3 foot of water. And by by being aware of that with your electronics, that's really going to help you key in on specific things. And it's the same with fishing your offshore areas. I mean, that's another area we'll get into a little bit later. But the main thing behind all that is controlling the variables that you can control within your fishing. You can control variables like how you cast and how you run the boat and how you read your electronics and how you spend your time. Bass fishing is a combination of a ton of different control variables and uncontrolled variables. And there's a lot of them. I mean, weather is an uncontrolled variable, fishing pressure is an uncontrolled variable, things like casting and boat positioning are controlled variables. You have got to identify those particular elements, whatever they may be, and like I said, take control of every single control variable that you can. So right off the bat, focus as much as you can on the mechanics, just your physical mechanics of your boat positioning and casting. The next thing that you've got to be aware of is awareness itself. Now, one of the things that comes with bass fishing, and this is something that you never ever master, or you never, get to be where you're just the best at it, is your awareness for your surroundings. And when I talk about things like awareness, a lot of people lose interest in it because it's something that's abstract, and it's something that it's not an easy fix for them. A lot of guys out there, they'll suck up information on lure colors and all that type of stuff, but when you talk about stuff like awareness, their mind drifts off into another direction. Guys, listen to me very carefully right here. If you're on this channel and you're wanting to become a better angler, you cannot ignore what I'm about to talk about right here as far as the awareness of it. Awareness is the key to not only surviving in nature on whatever level. I don't care if you're camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, whatever like that, but in bass fishing, it's extremely critical. You have to try to be an information sponge when you're on the water as much as you can. And what I mean by that is, when you're on the water, you have to, first of all, put everything in a box and like compartmentalize your thoughts. You can't be out there bass fishing thinking about, your mortgage payments due tomorrow, or, you're not getting along with your wife about something or whatever. You have got to be able to discipline your thinking and focus on the task at hand, is what you're trying to do on the water. And the awareness is what you have to focus on with that. And let's say, for example, I'll just talk again about going down the bank, fishing laydowns or boat docks or something like that. When you go down a stretch, a bank, or even if you're graphing or live scoping or whatever, it could be anything in bass fishing. But when you're fishing, there are clues that are going around all around you from nature that you have to absorb and that you can't ignore. Now, let's say I'm going down that bank and, I'm just fishing back in this cove and there's mixed covering everywhere. If I come up, and I'll just sort of give you a sample here. If I come up and there's 4 or 5 laydowns in the water, and maybe I catch a bass off one of the laydowns and not off of the other laydowns, anytime that you catch a fish, you have to take a breather and you have to analyze what happened there in order for you to generate that strike. Be aware of what was the deal with that one laydown that you just caught that fish off of, and you didn't catch a fish off the next 3 or 4 laydowns. It could be something as subtle as the diameter of the limbs, or the complexity of the limbs, or the water depth on the inside part of the laydown, the water depth on the outside part of the laydown, the way that the shade was coming off the bank, the way that the sun was positioned on it, if there was any fry or bait fish around that particular object. Was the angle of the bank different? Was it on a point? Was it on a straight stretch? Was there any rock composition changes where that particular laydown was? What was your casting angle? What was the speed to retrieve on your bait? The point is every time you catch a fish, there is almost an unlimited amount of potential data that you can gather on that. And the only way that you can use that effectively in your fishing is you have to have reproducible results from it. One fish does not make a pattern. So If you catch one fish like that and it's just haphazard, you may not pay that much attention to it. But if you catch 2 or 3 fish and there's something sort of getting tied into that, that is when you just sort of have to take a break a little bit and step back and see if there's any common threads that tie those together. That's called pattern fishing. Now, pattern fishing is there's 2 different types of fishing that you can approach in your bass fishing. There's a pattern fishing and there's area fishing. And what I mean by this is, if you're not familiar with it, pattern fishing is just like what I was talking about, the laydown. Say you're catching bass, flipping a jig on a laydown. There may be something reproducible about that laydown as far as the type of wood it is or the type of depth it is, that you can go around the lake and run it in different areas. That's a pattern. And then an area is when you get into one particular spot or area and you fish everything in there. You may catch one on a dock, you may catch one on a stump, you may catch one on a rocky bank, you may catch one on a point, maybe all within sight of each other. And those areas like that, for some reason, areas usually are better than a pattern to run as far as in your bass fishing. Most every tournament that you're going to find out there that's won is won off of areas or spots. There are very few tournaments that are won off of patterns anymore. There used to be quite a few patterns, quite a few areas, or quite a few tournaments won just on patterns, but not so much anymore. So you have to be able to identify what is the best approach for you to fish. Is it running a pattern or is it an area type fishing? And that just depends on the situation and the day in general there. But that's the first thing that you have to identify it. One of the things that you'll know about bass fishing is if you get into a good area, there's a commonality that comes with getting into a really good area that holds a lot of fish. If you're gonna try to find the best areas in the lake, you have to look for a couple different elements. You have to look for a part of the lake that has the ability to support a larger population of bass. And what I'm saying by that is that the area that you choose, it has to have a mix of different types of cover in it. It has to have a mix of water depths in it. You have to have a combination of shallows and deep water access and feeding flats and that type of stuff. And you have to have enough area and cover to support a group of fish. If you're, say for example, if you pull into a cove and there's 2 laydowns in it and you catch a bass off one of those laydowns and then you don't catch another bass anywhere in that cove, that is not an area that's going to be highly productive. But if you pull back into a bay that has 50 boat docks and 100 laydowns and 25 secondary points, you have enough of a diversity of cover to catch a large number of fish on multiple days. And that is the big key, guys, in successful bass fishing, is you have to learn, and you can learn how to identify what is the best area to fish. And once you get good at it, you can pretty much look at it, and a lot of times you can just look at a map, and you can look at a map and determine how productive an area is going to be. So that's another thing that you have to do, is once you establish confidence in your mechanics, like your casting and your boat positioning and your ability to run the boat and all that type of stuff, the next thing that you have to do is you have to learn to identify what are the best areas of the lake that you're fishing. Now there's no one answer to this as far as what the best areas of the lake is going to be, because lakes are completely different. You got natural bodies, you got rivers, you got tidal rivers, you got man-made impoundments, you got clear water, you got dirty water. There's a wide range of water that bass uses. But what you have to do in your particular area is you have to gain an understanding about seasonal patterns and seasonal movements. Now, this is another aspect in bass fishing that gets ignored. Guys, if I do a video out there, I'm telling you, if you guys watch the channel much and you pay attention to how many views I get on my videos, if I do a video bitching about live scope or talking about a modification, I get a ton of views. But as soon as I mention the word, bass movement, bass behavior, it's like crickets. Nobody watches it. Again, guys, you have if you are serious about becoming a better angler, you have got to change and make a mental shift in the areas you put your attention to. You've got to focus on those things like awareness and bass movement and bass behavior. Those are the things that are going to allow you to get really good as an angler. You're going to grow at a snail's pace if you don't. So pay close attention to that, is what I'm about to talk about here. And again, I'm just skimming over this stuff. It's as it comes to me, so we'll go into details later maybe, but in a different video, but I'm just going to give you guys some foundation. Bass movement and bass behavior, that's the thing that you have got to become ate up with learning. And the thing that you're going to find out in bass fishing is that there's no guarantees and there's no rules that works all the time. I can sit and tell you that the bass should be in this particular part of the lake and they should bite this under these conditions, because a lot of times they will, but most of the time there's some type of external variable that has changed that allows that not to work. I got to get the chickens out of the tackle room here. So the first thing that you've got to do here is build this understanding of seasonal patterns and seasonal movements of bass. And to do that, there's two elements involved here. The two most important elements in patterns and movement are water temperature and water clarity. If you take me to any lake across the country, I don't care if it's a lake I've ever been in at, if it's a lake I know like the back of my hand, if you drop me off on the bank, give me a boat and say, Randy, here's your water clarity, here's your water temperature on the lake, I can go find bass, because that's the only two elements that you really need in order to understand seasonal movements of bass. The thing that you're going to find out about bass is they're transitional as far as the mood and the personality that the bass has, and that changes subtly, and it changes with a combination of things. It changes with a combination of the water temperatures, the water clarity, the time of the year, and specifically the daylight hours. One of the things that I found out about bass fishing is that the daylight hours have a huge impact on the cycles and the biological rhythms of a bass. You can say, okay, the water temperature is 55 degrees, the water visibility is this, and they're going to bite this particular technique, which a lot of times they will. But what happens is the change that you have in that comes with the fact that the daylight hours every day are either getting 2 minutes longer or 2 minutes shorter based upon the time of year that it is. And these ancient biological rhythms are the things that trigger bass into movements. It's more so than weather, more so than water temperature and water clarity, because water temperature and water clarity is affected a lot by weather patterns. And weather patterns can be all over the place. I mean, it can range from, you can have a front come through, or you can have an unseasonable wet period or dry period or whatever. So those things are not as consistent. But the thing that is consistent is those daylight hours. And that's what those fish will really react to. In general, I want to sort of give you guys a foundation that will help you with bass movement behavior, because you need to know this. And then this is a very, very brief thing I'm going to touch upon here, because I could talk for hours just about bass movement and bass behavior. In general, what you have is you have got to determine three or four different factors. First of all, the species of the bass, whether you're fishing for largemouth, spotted bass, or smallmouth. Each one of those species react a little bit different as far as their movements and behavior. The next thing is the part of the country that you're in and the lake that you have, whether the lake be a natural body of water, again, a river system, a clear water impoundment, whatever like that. Those are factors that cause situations unique to themselves. So there's subsets of patterns and movements within each lake that you go to. For example, if I take you guys up to Lake Champlain in October bass fishing, it's going to be completely different than going to Sam Rayburn Lake in October bass fishing. The patterns and movements are going to be different because you have different species, you have different water temperatures, you have different rock compositions, everything's different. But nevertheless, the bass are still going to have seasonal movements and behaviors based upon those particular areas. Now let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'll give you guys a wide range of examples how movement and patterns of bass change over the country, because some of it is more pronounced than other. Let's say, for example, you're fishing out at Lake Okeechobee in Florida. If you guys have been to Lake Okeechobee, it's not what it used to be. The lake sucks now compared to what it was 30 years ago. But any Lake Okeechobee, Lake Kissimmee, Toho, any Florida like that's pretty much the same. And the fact that the bass have fewer options. They're shallow bodies of water, they're full of vegetation, and the bass are going to be relating most of the time to some type of shallow vegetation. And what the techniques that you use there are minimally different. Pitching it, for example, in Florida, pitching and flipping work 12 months out of the year. Depending upon the time of year, there may be a topwater bite, there may be a lipless crankbait bite based upon the growth and the height of the vegetation. But nevertheless, the seasonal movements and patterns they're not much down there. The bass are in the same places. You can catch bass at Lake Okeechobee in the same place in July, the same place you catch them in January, and a lot of times with the same techniques. But as you move away from there and you get into more natural bodies of water, say for example, my lakes around here in southwest Missouri, say Bull Shoals Lake and Table Rock Lake, or even if you're fishing Lake Lanier or Lake Cumberland or whatever, Clearwater, Highland impoundments, you have a tremendous noticeable difference in the seasonal transition and movements of the bass. For example, in the wintertime, you may have the bass, suspended out over deep water, suspended 20 and 30 foot down. You may have some bass suspended over timber tops. You may have some bass living on the bottom in 25 or 30 foot of water. And you're not going to have a lot of bass using the same type of cover that you catch them, say, in the springtime of the year. And same with like in the fall time. These bass move and roam a lot more in man-made impoundments than they do in natural bodies of water. The same for your northern fish. One of the things that you're going to find in bass fishing is that natural bodies of water that have vegetation, the seasonal movements and patterns are a lot less pronounced and noticeable than they are in man-made lakes. And most of us fish man-made lakes. Most of the bass fishing in this country is done, in man-made lakes. So one of the things that you have to do, or one of the things that you can do to really help your bass fishing and your understanding of seasonal movements, is try to gather as much information as you can through different type of resources about how tournaments have been won in different times of the year. Even if you're not a tournament fisherman, guys, if you're just a recreational bank fisherman, or if you're just a fun fisherman, don't discount what you can learn from tournament results, because they will pinpoint you in a really good direction on where to start a foundation as far as the seasonal movements. Another thing about that is when you're looking and reading about tournament results, don't pay much attention to first place, because first place is usually a freak deal. It's usually some guys found something off the wall, and it's not a representation of what a lot of times most of the bass are doing. Try to pay attention on how the guys that finished like 10th place did, because that's more of a true representation about how most people were fishing. The seasonal patterns and movements also, again, are greatly affected by water temperature and water clarity, and the correlation between the two. Because when you have water temperatures, let's say for example, that are in the mid-50s, the bass are going to behave a lot more different if the water temperature is rising into the mid-50s versus whether it's falling into the mid-50s. So say for example, a lot of times the bass, say it's in March or something, and the water temperature is gradually climbing up into the mid-50s, it's warming up, you may have a big population of those bigger fish, those bigger females that were suspended out in the wintertime. They're going to start moving shallow, not necessarily to spawn, but start prepping, staging for spawning. And that's why you catch a lot of big fish in March when that water temperature starts to get up into 55 degrees. And in vice versa, in the fall time of the year, when that water temperature starts to fall back down into 55 degrees from it being warmer, you don't have that same type of transition. You don't have those quality bass moving shallow in the numbers that they do in the springtime of the year, just because it's reaching that 55-degree water temperature. So the relationship to the water temperature has a lot to do, again, with the time of the year. Water clarity is another variable that affects bass movement behavior a lot. Water clarity will dictate technique, and there's a lot of different things that affect water clarity. There's most water clarity is affected by some type of a seasonal weather pattern. Now, let me give you guys a good prime example of how weather patterns can affect the lake in oddball ways. The first Bassmaster tournament I ever won was down at Bugs Island Lake in Virginia in October. Now, normally you don't consider October a month of the year where the water's high. Normally you associate high water in the springtime of the year, and lower water in the fall and the winter. But in that particular tournament, there was a hurricane that came off the East Coast about a week before we got to that tournament, like Hurricane Hugo or something like that. And since Bugs Island Lake was in North Carolina and it was within, 100 miles of the coast or so, this hurricane skirted the shoreline and dumped a ton of rain on Bugs Island Lake, and it caused the lake to come up, 5 or 6 feet into the flooded bushes, which is freakishly abnormal, for that time of year. And I was able to win that tournament flipping a jig in flooded willow trees in October that normally never would take place. And that's what you have in every aspect of bass fishing. Is there are very few quote normal conditions. There's usually something always going on that's a little bit different. It can be a little warmer than normal. It can be a little cooler than normal, a little drier, a little wetter. So you can't duplicate things year after year after year in the same place in the same time. That's why it's very difficult in bass fishing to go back year after year and catch fish in the exact same places at the exact same time as you did in the past, because there's normally some type of weather variable change. And you never stop learning about this. When you're talking about, bass movement, bass behavior, migrations, that type of stuff, it's something that we're all learning about. Now, tied into that, let's talk a little bit about bass personality. One of the big keys that I've figured out in fishing is you have to determine the mood and the personality of the fish. If you guys have watched the channel here a lot, you hear me talking a lot about mood and personality of the bass. And I am a firm believer that the mood, if you can determine what the mood and the personality of a bass is, that goes a long way into you picking out the technique and especially the type of retrieve that will catch that fish. One of the things that is important to remember about a bass is bass rarely bite your lure because they're hungry. I think that most bass feed at night all year long, and that's my opinion. They're opportunistic, but I think the active feeding periods for a bass is at night. I think when you catch a bass during the daytime, a lot of times the fish have made a mistake. And when you catch a bass during daylight hours, it's usually because of it's a combination. The bass was angry, curious, it was your reaction strike, it was competition amongst the other bass in the area. There's a lot of other factors than just being hungry why you caught that bass in. So in knowing that gives you a good indication of the technique that you need to use at the particular time. So let's say, for example, I was fishing at Table Rock Lake last week, and it was late August, and normally late August is a really tough time to catch shallow fish in a Highland lake. It's just not real conducive to that, because the mood and the personality of those fish that are living shallow water, they just are not real active and aggressive. So knowing that, I wanted to try to catch these fish shallow on Table Rock Lake, because we were filming a show for Fish the Moment, So I went up and I started looking for those type of areas that I felt the fish would be the most shallow in, which would be the most off-colored water. Now, no, I knew, and one of the things you'll know about bass fishing is there's always a percentage of a bass population that lives in shallow water most all year long. You know, sometimes more than others, but even in the summertime, when the fishing's tough, every single lake across the country has a segment of the population living in shallow water. They don't, just because it's the summertime, they don't swim out of that 3 and 4 foot of water if the water's off colored and if they've got cover, and they don't swim 20 miles to get in deep clear water. That's just not what bass do. Bass are individuals. They don't have a collective consciousness like that. So I knew that in order for me to catch these fish in this shallow, dirty, hot water, I had to generate a reaction strike. I knew that the fish weren't going to be actively feeding into those conditions. So I took a little square bill crankbait, like a Megabass 1.2, and I started burning it fast around the areas I thought the fish were in, the rocky banks, laydowns, and that type of stuff. And I started catching fish, and I experimented a little bit because I'd go back in there in the same areas and I'd slow down with like a creature bait or a jig or a shaky head or slow rolling a spinner bait, something like that, and I couldn't catch anything. I knew the fish were there because I'd been catching them on the crankbait, but they wouldn't react to a slow bait. They only reacted to a fast bait that was coming down in the zone that they were at. That is what I'm talking about, the mood and the personality of the fish. You have to figure out what that is and dictate your technique to that. Now, at another time, let's say if I was fishing those same areas and it was December and the water temperature was 50 degrees, I may not get a bite on a crankbait. I may have to switch and fish a jig slow or a creature bait slow or a shaky head. Mood and personality of the fish are constantly changing. Sorry about that dump truck there, guys. They're building a middle school just down the road from the house here, and they've been coming in here constantly with dump truck loads of rocks, so it's been noisy. So that's another thing that comes with experience, is you get to understand the mood and the personality of the fish based upon your water clarity and your water temperatures. Always, that's one of the things that you need to get stuck in your mind in bass fishing is water temperature, water clarity. Always think about that, because water temperature, water clarity will dictate technique and speed to retrieve and all that type of stuff. Okay, let's talk. We'll go in a little bit more stuff here. We're 37 minutes into it. Try to keep it like an hour or so you guys aren't tied up here all day long. Let's talk about things that actually generate strikes in bass. Again, you got to come from the point of view that bass are not feeding very much, and so you always got to think in terms of what is it going to take to trick this bass into striking, or what's going to get this bass to hit my lure if it's not hungry, which it's probably not hungry, and a barking dog next door. So the thing that you do that, and how you do that, and how you trick bass into your hitting your bait that aren't hungry, is there's several different things you can do with that. The biggest two factors with getting a bass that's not aggressive and hungry to hit your bait, it's a combination of your speed to retrieve and your color on the bait that you're throwing. Those are the things that are going to get a bass to react to it. Specifically, speed to retrieve and action. If you're fishing, it doesn't matter if you're fishing a moving bait like a crankbait or a buzz bait or a spinner bait, or if you're fishing a jig or something like that, there's always one type of cadence or retrieve that's going to generate strikes more than another. Let's say, for example, if you're fishing a jig, sometimes they want that jig hopped 1.5 feet off the bottom. Sometimes they want it hopped 6 inches off the bottom. Sometimes they want it dragged along the bottom and never hopped off the bottom. I've seen specific situations where you could throw a jig out there and you could hop it back to the boat and you'd never get a bite, and then you throw it out there and drag it along the bottom and they'd kill it. This is this is another piece of juice I'm giving you here, guys, with this speed retrieve. It's the same with moving baits, like crankbaits, jerk baits, spinner baits, that type of stuff. When you're fishing a bait like a crankbait or a jerk bait, you have to think in terms of speed retrieve and cadence in order to generate those strikes, specifically with those two bait categories. And let's talk a little bit about, you know, the crankbait. I won't go into more of the off-the-wall stuff like jerk bait. I'll try to keep it generic just for the sake of keeping the video shorter. But let's say, for example, you're fishing a moving bait like a crankbait. You have the option of fishing that bait at a slow steady retrieve, a medium steady retrieve, a fast steady retrieve, a slow stop and go, a medium stop and go, a fast stop and go, a stop and go and pull. There's an endless amount of potential retrieves that you can use on a crankbait or jerkbait or spinnerbait or whatever. The thing that you have to do in determining what is going to trigger that strike is pay attention to that first fish that you get. The first fish that you catch, you have to take a mental inventory on how that fish struck and what was your speed or retrieve. And also pay close attention to how that fish was hooked. If that fish was hooked very well, that's a good indication you had everything right with the speed or retrieve, but pay close attention. Now, if you're not catching fish and you think it's speed or retrieve or something like that, just experiment a little bit. You know, try for, if you're in an area that you think there's some fish in, try for 5 minutes, one type of cadence to retrieve. And then if that doesn't work, mix it up. But speed it up, slow it down, reel it steady, reel it stop and go. Constantly experiment until you hit upon what you feel is the thing that's going to generate the strike with that. And that is the key to making those fish bite. And that's the key to manipulating and tricking bass to bite. Now, in correlation with that, with the speed retrieve and the cadence, you have to hit on the right color combination. And don't get me wrong, it's not like you have to have everything perfect to catch a bass, because if you're in a good area, you're still going to catch bass even if you're not doing the right thing. But we're trying to maximize the amount of fish that you catch. So once you picked up on what you think is the right speed or retrieve, the next thing you can do to sort of refine that a little bit is your color selection. And I think speed or retrieve and cadence is more important than color, but color can be a big deal too, especially generating bigger fish size. One of the things that you'll find out about colors is that there's no right or wrong or exact science to this. I can give you a foundation. Like, for example, the foundational thing that I teach is that on windy, sunny days, a chrome finish works good. Cloudy, dark days, a flat finish works good. And on sunny, bright days, a translucent finish works good. That's a general, true overview of colors. But color is very similar to retrieve in the fact that you have to constantly experiment with it. Again, if you get into a good area, not catching some fish, make a color change. You know, do it for 3 or 4 minutes, change up colors again until you feel like you hit upon the right one. And the thing that you'll notice about color, guys, and this is another piece of juice, this is a juice here it's a hard-learned juice, is that you will be able to pick out your colors of your hard baits, top waters, whatever, even jigs, even slow baits, by looking at the lure in the water in correlation to the water clarity. And you will be able to look at that in the water and know if it's the right color. Now, what I mean by that is as you fish longer and as your awareness becomes higher, you'll be able to look at a bait in the water and know it's got to stand out a little bit, and yet it has to blend in just a little bit. There's a fine line. You don't want it to stand out too much, and you don't want it to blend in too much. There's a really fine element within there. And the more that you fish, particularly if you start catching a lot of fish on one particular color, if you put that bait in the water, you'll know what I'm talking about with. So pay close attention to your speed retrieve, your cadence, and your color. Those are the things that are going to generate a lot of strikes. Another thing that will generate a lot of strikes that you normally wouldn't is your casting angle. Casting angle has a lot to do with it too. And casting angle is not determined by what you think it is a lot of times. For example, one of the biggest myths in fishing is that you need to cast up current and bring your bait downstream. It's because the fish is positioned in the current. That's the biggest myth in fishing, guys. I've caught so many fish casting with the current. The angle of the cast that you make is relative to how the bass are positioned, and how those bass are positioned is relative to the current and the wind and the type of cover. Bass are not victim of their environments. They can move around where they want to, and they can move around fast. So the key on casting angles is make repetitive casts at different angles until you key on what is the right angled cast. I'll give you guys, here's a prime example of what I'm talking about. I like to fish jerk baits on points a lot in the wintertime. And traditionally what I do is I'll get the boat out there and 25 foot of water, and I'll cast to the bank and I'll work it back out into that deeper water, and most of the time I'll catch those fish halfway back to the boat. There's been a lot of situations where the only way I can generate a strike is by putting that boat in 15 or 20 feet of water and casting across the point into 15 or 20 foot of water, or getting the boat in 5 foot of water and casting out to 20 feet of water and bringing it from that angle. So don't get locked into one particular angle. You have to experiment with the angles, just like you do the water, the color of the bait and the speed of retreat. It's all information that you're trying to absorb. The more information that you can absorb, the closer you will get to catching the fish. And that's one of the big keys in fishing, guys, is you have to tell yourself that the bass are always biting. And it's a matter of just figuring out the technique, the area, all the details about it to get those fish to strike, because they really are biting everywhere all the time. Now, last part here, I was going to go into lures a little bit, but I don't really want to. We'd get off into left field and get off into another area about it. The last thing I'm going to leave you with here, because I think we're like 50 minutes into it, is I want to talk a little bit about the mental part of fishing, specifically just mental part of fishing. Again, when I say this, everybody tunes out. Guys, if you can learn anything from this seminar I'm giving you, it's that don't ignore the mental part, don't ignore the bass movement and transition part of it, and don't ignore the fact that studying the bass from a biological standpoint, you've got to study the fish with it. So the mental part of fishing is super, super critical. And what I'm talking about this is you can go off into way out into left field talking about the mental stuff. And if you guys have watched Mental Mondays, you know that I've done that before. But on a more practical level, what I want to talk about is you have to be able to maintain focus all day long, because you can't maximize your potential as a bass angler if you're not focused on what you're doing. And the focus on the water requires some type of mental discipline, because there's a lot of different things that can distract you. The weather can distract you. It can be too hot, it can be too cold. If you got some dude that's talking in the boat constantly, you can't focus on what you're doing, or thinking about stuff that you need to be doing at home. You have got to discipline your thoughts to where you're focused in that particular moment all the time. And you have to fish each cast all the way through. So the point of what I'm talking about here is this is one of those things that separates the marquee top level dudes versus the average fishing dude. And this is the frame. When I'm in a tournament and I'm kicking butt in a tournament, this is the frame I'm in that I'm getting ready to tell you about here. Is the moment that you make your cast out there, you have got to be thinking and expecting to get bit on that cast. You can't just randomly throw it out there and just start reeling in. It's like when I make that cast, say with a crankbait or jerkbait, I'm jerking that bait down and I'm trying to visualize and I'm trying to picture what that bait looks like in the water, and how, if there may be the fish behind it, and I'm expecting that fish to hit every single cast out there. Every single cast. If you do that every single cast all day long, you will be completely mentally exhausted by the end of the day. But the advantages has out there, and here's another part of it, that it's one of those abstract things that I can't really explain in fishing. If you expect to catch a fish every single cast, and you can maintain that, the awareness that you're giving that cast will help you catch more bass. Your cadence and your motion and your movements will be better because you're focused on that and you're aware of that. Your boat positioning, your casting angle, all that stuff will be at the top of the game because you're aware of it and you're focused on it constantly. And it's the difference between catching 5 bass a day and 25 bass a day. Yeah, you can go out there and you can be talking to your buddy all day long and never paying attention to where you're casting or what you're doing, and you can still catch some fish. You're still going to maybe run into a few fish, but you're not going to maximize your potential unless you really, really focus in on that particular aspect of it. Another thing you have to do in fishing is you have got to constantly pump yourself up to tell yourself you're doing the right thing, even if you're not catching any fish. I'm going to give you guys a couple exercises here that'll really help you out. One of the things that you can really help your fishing out is try to take some time to picture in your mind how you want your day to unfold. Let's say, for example, you're fishing a tournament or whatever. One of the first things that I do is I try to picture and I try to feel what it's like that it's 2:30 in the afternoon and I look back at my live well and I see 5 big ones back there. And I can say I'm starting out in the morning, I don't have anything in the live well, but all day long I'm picturing myself opening that live well and looking in that live well and seeing 5 big ones in there as I'm running back to weigh in. If you do that all day long and you tell yourself, it's like, I'm going to have 5 big ones in the boat. It's just, I don't know when I'm going to catch them, but I'm going to have them in there by the end of the day. I don't know how it's going to unfold. I'm just trusting it's going to unfold. Guys, if you maintain that focus in there of thinking about that, along with being present in your cast 100% during the day, and you do not let any negative thinking creep into your mind. Say, for example, you pull up to your best spot and there's some dude on it, just tell yourself, well, that's no big deal, I'm going to go find a better spot. If you play these games with yourself in your mind all day long, you will be amazed at how that translates into being successful in the water over a period of time. Now, I'm not saying it works every time, but I say it works more than not. So really take some time to police and monitor your thought. This is an aspect of fishing that doesn't get talked about or looked about enough. And finally, we got a few minutes left here before we hit an hour. Next thing I'll talk about here, and like I said, I haven't even scratched the surface on this, where it seems like the hour's flowing. But the next thing I want to talk about in fishing is that in order to become the best angler that you can be, is you have to ask yourself a couple different questions. Number one, what do you enjoy fishing? Do you enjoy flipping and pitching? Do you enjoy staring at a live scope? Do you enjoy fishing a shaky head? Whatever aspect of bass fishing that you really like to do, that is the aspect of fishing that you have got to become a master at. Because if you love something, that you're going to put more energy and time and effort into it than if you don't. Like me, I hate live scope. I'm never going to use it. I don't like fishing offshore, so I'm not going to put any energy into that. But I love picking up a big jig and flipping it into a bush. So I, over the years, have become a master of that. And I know if I get into the situation where I can fish a big jig and flooded cover, I'm going to catch them. I'm going to catch them as good or better than anybody in the tournament. I know that. So you have to identify what your love is as far as what you love to do and get better at it than anybody that you know. Break it down and turn that particular technique into an art form. That's what's going to allow you to, take it to the next level. Or say, for example, maybe you just want to be versatile. Maybe you don't have something that you really love. Maybe you just want to catch fish. You can work on your versatility, and you can be a master at all different techniques, and you can take the time to learn how to drop shot and how to flip and how to throw a big glide bait. If that's something you like to do, try to to capitalize on that as your strength. But every single angler out there, you know, regardless of their skill level, has got to sort of ask themselves that question there. And that's one of the things that's going to really allow you to get a lot better in fishing. And finally, guys, it's just time on the water, man. You can watch these YouTube videos as much as you want. You can talk to guys and talk to people as much as you want, but you have got to get out on that water, because by getting out on the water, that allows you to maximize your own creativity. Because if you were in the boat with me, whoever's watching this video, if we were fishing together and we were going down a stretch of bank, I would approach that bank in one way and you would approach it completely different, but from your point of view. I may think in my mind, oh, this is going to work, this is going to work, and you may think, well, I think this is going to work. And either day, either one of us could be successful. Maybe on one day my approach works, and maybe on another day your approach works. So you have to really give yourself credit for your own individuality and your own creativity and uniqueness, because that is so important in fishing. That's more important than experience. If experience was so important in fishing, guys like Rick Clunn and Larry Nixon, they'd win every tournament even today. But you see what happens is, like, the younger guys tend to dominate in tournaments even over the guys that have decades of experience, simply because of their creativity. I mean, it's just like with me, for example. I guarantee some of those kids that are on the Elite Series that are smoking right now, I know a ton more about bass fishing than they do, but they are more in tune with their creativity and their ingenuity than I am right now, because I've got locked into things that have worked for me for decades. So my creativity and my ingenuity has taken a backseat to my experience. So don't discount, guys, the benefit and how valuable your own unique individuality is, and your own unique approach to tournament. Don't hesitate on trying something because you don't think it'll work, or you've never heard it wouldn't work. If you want to try some crazy color or some crazy bait that nobody else has tried, do it, because that's how new techniques and approaches are figured out. So anyway, guys, we're about an hour into it. I'm a little tired of talking right now. My voice is getting a little hoarse. Let me know what you guys think about this, man. I know this was sort of a wide-ranging seminar here. I didn't really know what I was going to talk about, just started talking, but I was thinking about maybe moving forward, we might do some technique-specific stuff, like do an hour on fishing a big jig, do an hour on, you know, fishing big spinner baits, do an hour on fishing swim baits, sort of a seminar with that. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Hope you guys learned something out of that. Please hit that subscribe button, and we'll talk to you guys later. See you.